Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening everyone. Thank you for the chance that given to me. Now I would like to present about The Man He Killed by Thomas Hart. Let me introduce myself and my partner. I am Rizaldhi Vigarsa and my partner are Putri Fajar Arum Astri Mafidah, Khusnun Afifah, and Vindy Monica. In this opportunity, I would like to present about diction and tone. This is the Putri under title The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy. Had he and I but met by some old ancient inn, we should have sat us down to wed. Right many a nipperkin, but ranged as infantry, and staring face to face, I shot at him as he at me, and killed him in his place. I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so my foe, of course he was. That's clear enough, although he thought he'd list, perhaps, offhand like just as I was out of work, had sold his traps. No other reason why. Yes, quiet and curious worries. You shoot a fellow down, you tread if met where anybody's, or help to half a crown. Summary of the Putri. The speaker speculates on the existence of a war in the poem. The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy. Hardy also considers the enemy's position. This poem was published at the time of the Second War. In the first stanza, the unknown first-person narrator mentioned that they might have shared a drink if he had met the man standing in front of him at an inn. In the second stanza, however, he shot the man because it is his job. They are at war, and both are soldiers. The third stanza shows why the narrator killed the other man. He was his foe. By considering the ironic nature of war, the speaker ends in stanza 4 and 5. That is, you go to war for work, then you are ordered to kill a person who might have been your friend. Diction. Diction is the choice of words by a poetry as a means to express ideas with the expectation of appropriate effects, thus creating an image for both the reader and listener. Vijayanti 2012. Interpretation of diction. In the poem The Man He Killed, the first stanza in first line, the poet reveals I and he that show himself and the subject. Then in second line, the poet uses ancient inn, which means an old building. Then in line 4, there is word nipperkin, which means a liquor container or vessel with capacity of a half pint or less. In poet's stanza is like giving a supposition if they meet in a condition that is not a war. Had he and I but met, or by some old ancient inn, then explained that they would sit and drink, we should have sat us down or right many nipperkin. In the second stanza of the fifth line, but range as infantry, the skater state the word range as infantry means that they are in different camps facing each other and staring face to face, and they are fighting each other. I shot at him as he at me, and killed him in his place. In the next stanza, the poet is like giving reason and previous stanzas. I shot him dead because he was my foe. The word foe is used to reinforce his statement. Then in the next line, just so my foe of course he was, or that's clear enough. The use of just so and of course indicates that I is trying to convince himself. The use of although at the end of the stanza shows doubt in his reasoning. In the fourth stanza, he thought heedless perhaps or offhand like just I. The use of just as I shows an equation of the state of I and he was out of work is shown if they are following the military because they have left and their work and not for reason of defending the country had sold his trap, or no other reason why, in both pens. In the last stanza and Putri, the poet reveals that war is a strange thing. Quaint and curious, this statement reveals that the author feels pessimistic about war and states this with a sentence that contains irony. You shot a fellow down. The sentence, you'd treat if we met where any bar is, or help to have a crown. Tone. Tone in written composition is an attitude of a writer toward a subject or an audience. Tone is generally conveyed through the choice of words or the viewpoint of a writer on a particular subject. Interpretation of tone. First stanza. Had he and I but met, but by some old ancient inn. The tone of this first stanza is anecdotal and states that if the narrator met the man, we presume he intends to kill by some old ancient inn, or just in normal day-to-day life. They would have got on well. This hypothetical situation and anecdotal tone portray the relatable humanity of the two men. We should have set us down to wet, right many a nipperkin. These two lines are examples of informal Old Dorset dialect. A nipperkin has two meanings, either a liquor container or a unit of measurement of volume. One nip is either one third of a pin, or any amount less than or equal to half a pin. The key thing to take from this line is that the two men are sitting down to a drink together, and thereby Hardy's tone, dialect, and language help paint a picture of traditional, peaceful, Old English society. Second stanza, but range as infantry, but not only acts as a tone shift, which we see in many poems, but also serve to shock the speaker out of the hypothetical and into the reality. Infantry also marked a transition from hypothetical times of peace to vivid image and the brutal reality of war, and staring face to face. This imagery of them staring face to face is harrowing and quite emotive. It shows the last ounces of humanity within their veins, as each man knows the outcome but delays it just for a second to compose themselves, reflect, and look into the other person's eyes. The tension is palpable. I shot at him as he at me. There was a mutuality, almost an agreement, to their respective shooting as both men shot at once. This mutuality conveys a connection between them, perhaps mutual respect, just like they had in hypothetical scenario of the first stanza, and killed him in his place. As the narrator reveals himself to be the man who walked away after landing the shot, we see a glimpse into how war has manipulated and dehumanized his mind. Hardy illustrates this with the monosyllabic matter of fake language which is devoid of emotion. This emphasizes the evils of war. The third stanza, I shot him dead because the the caesura at the end of this line very significantly signifies the man pausing to think why he actually shot the man. The fact he is forced to pause and reflect shows that he doesn't really know why. Because he was my foe. The man cites his justification as being that the man was his foe. This shows the extent to which he has been manipulated by war as he believes. It justifies murder without any personal grievance with or even knowing who the man is full stop. Hardy is examining the morals of war and the inhuman, mindless killer it turns its participant into. Just so, my fool of course he was. It's evident here that the narrator is not only trying to defend his action but justify them to himself as well. That's clear enough, although Hardy's use of punctuation is again key in setting a tone of destructive introspection and suppressed guilt. The semicolon represents a pause to contemplate his action as well as compose himself, and the enjambment shows that the man's thoughts are tumbling on, and despite his attempted justification, not resolved. Fourth stanza. He thought he'd list perhaps. After examining his own emotion, the narrator focuses on the life of the other man, another sign of guilt. Offhand, like just as I. Offhand means without previous thought or consideration. This implies that the other man sinned up carelessly and without proper consideration, just like the narrator did. Just as I emphasizes the similarities between them and how war put them in a position of confrontation when in day-to-day life their similarities would have allied them. Was out of work had solved his traps. The fact they were both out of work seems to make them vulnerable for enlisting. The lack of wealth and self-worth unemployment drives them to enlist, just like hardship force people toward drug and gambling. No other reason why. Unlike the previous one, this stanza has a conclusive end. Whilst the narrator could not conclude why he killed his foe, he can conclude why they were put in that situation in the first place. Fifth stanza. Yes, quaint and curious war is. The last stanza shifts its focus from the two men toward the bigger picture and the bigger evil of war. The tone is conclusive as the narrator surmises the oddness of war. Describing war as odd doesn't seem to like hearted for such effect. You shoot a fellow down, you treat if we met where any bar is, or help to have a crown. The last three lines describe how war is odd because it drives one to shoot a fellow down when if you saw him in a day-to-day life, you you'd buy him a drink or help him to have a crown. A coin introduced in one 1530 and 36. It's an emotive, yet light-hearted conclusion, as it deals with the overarching evil that is war and explores how this evil is transferred to its participants. That's all from our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.